The post closer to the house was leaning in this instance, which meant I had to kick my hinge out on the bottom to compensate in order to make my gate level.
The problem is not replacing that post. But if that post has already started leaning, there's nothing saying it's done. When we've done videos about wood frame gates in the past, half lap always comes up. The carpenters enter the chat and absolutely eat some of these guys up for not using half flap joints.
If you don't want your working surface to get glue on it, you can lay something underneath the frame, but this is our garage and the floor is already a mess, so I'm not really worried about it.
Seems like a lot of glue, but it also seems like something you wouldn't want to skimp on either. It does seem to make quite the mess.
Today's video is brought to you by our good friends over at Nationwide Industries, the Fence Pros' #1 choice. And they are this Fence Pros' #1 choice for a couple reasons. One, we love using their Keystone Traverse latches. They're easy to install. You simply bolt them onto the post. No drilling for rods or cutting the rods required. It's a pretty straightforward installation process. We also love using their full line of galvanized hardware. It shows up quickly and reliably.
All right, guys, today's video is called How to Build a Wooden Double Gate That Won't Sag by the Ryan Rudder channel. If you'd like to watch the full video in its entirety without my commentary, we'll link that video in the description below. All right, so we're starting this off about 20, 30 seconds into the video. He did a brief introduction prior to this. It looks like he's got an existing wooden gate that was sagging that he had been having problems with. So now we're going to learn how to build a wooden frame gate that won't sag. There are still companies that do wood frame gates, and obviously there's a lot of folks in the DIY crowd that build wooden gates rather than a steel frame gate. So I think this will be a good video for us to review.
So you'll take your tape measure and you're going to measure the distance between the two posts. And this is 161.5 inches. And so we're going to make our gates 80.5 inches each.
Those are big gates, especially for wood frame gates on wood posts. We haven't really had a look at the post yet, but probably a 6x6 hopefully for as big as this gate's going to be. When we were building wood frame gates, our wood frame option would be limited at an 8-foot overall opening. Anything bigger, we would go to a steel frame gate. In our experience, it didn't matter how well we built them, they would always tend to sag over time, or the post would warp, twist, or begin to pull over. Interested to see how he builds this big of a gate with a wood frame.
For the gate frame, we will be connecting the pieces together with half-lap joints. You can easily use your table saw or a circular saw and chisel.
When we've done videos about wood frame gates in the past, half lap always comes up. The carpenters enter the chat and absolutely eat some of these guys up for not using half flap joints. So according to the chat, he's off to a great start.
Set your fence depth to the width of the wood you'll be using. For us, that'll be 3.5 inches.
I like that in the shadow there, we can tell he's wearing a respirator. Sawdust is a very real deal. You don't want to breathe it in, especially, it looks like he's working with treated pine, so you definitely don't want that in your lungs. We're assuming he's also wearing safety glasses.
You'll make a series of cuts using your fence as your guide for the full width of the intersecting board. Hammer out the material while wearing safety glasses, and then use your table saw or chisel to clean up the rest of the joint.
It's an interesting method for cleaning that up using the table saw. I'm not a carpenter by trade, just have built fence for 25 years, but I've never seen a table saw used like that. Interesting to see tools used in new and interesting ways. It's probably not new, but new to me, interesting ways.
You can see the table saw does a great job at creating a smooth surface for the joint, and this is what it's going to look like. Each 2x4 will be joined together with the half-lap joint we created, which will produce a 90-degree angle at each joint that can be glued and screwed together. Once you have the frame pieces for your gate cut out, and you have your half-lap joints done, it'll go together just like a puzzle, and if you cut them correctly, they should be at a 90-degree angle, and everything should be straight. And so we'll go ahead and glue these and then screw these together.
One way to check if it's square would be to measure from opposing corners and make sure that measurement matches exactly. It'll make sure you know exactly where square is on that gate.
And then we'll put a cross piece in the middle. All right, as I glue each one of these joints together, I'm going to pre-drill 5 holes so I don't split this wood whenever I go put the screws through. And then I'm going to put glue in between there and then screw them together to make one solid joint. To glue the frame together, I'm going to use Titebond 3 Ultimate wood glue. If you don't want your working surface to get glue on it, you can lay something underneath the frame, but this is our garage and the floor is already a mess, so I'm not really worried about it.
Seems like a lot of glue, but It also seems like something you wouldn't want to skimp on either. It does seem to make quite the mess.
Use 1.5-inch exterior screws to screw each joint together, making sure they were snug so that the joints get pulled together, but not over tightening the screws so that I avoid splitting the wood. When you cut the cross member for your gate, you can lay it underneath the frame, making sure to have overlap on both members of the joint, leaving a majority of the overlap on the side of the frame for the bottom side and the top member of the frame for the top side. Then you can trace your lines and cut them with a circular saw.
This is exactly the right way to brace these. We've seen other videos explain this and then install them opposite, but what he's going to do is, hopefully he's going to do is install these in compression, which means that the braces transfer the weight or the gravitational force from the outside top corner down to the bottom corner closest to the gate post to transfer all of that to that hinge and transfer it through the hinge to the post.
Remember, we want the frame to be one solid piece, so make sure you glue every joint, which includes the cross members where they come in contact with the rest of the frame. Now that we have the frames of our gate build, we're going to let this dry overnight and then we'll hang them tomorrow. All right, so you can see my hinge is right here, and I want this gate to be as high up as possible, and I don't want to go stick a lag bolt directly through this joint that I just made. And so I'm going to lower this hinge down, and I'm going to raise the bottom hinge up to where they're not affecting these joints, and they're going to be in this member of the gate right here. I have these set up on a few bricks just to kind of keep them in position where I want them. As I pre-drill the holes for the lag bolts, they're going to go in with the hinges. To reduce the risk of your posts and frames splitting over time, make sure to pre-drill your holes where the lag bolts will be installed.
So he's using butterfly hinges as opposed to like a strap or a T, which would, strap would have longer members that go down the rails, trying to grab as much of that horizontal member as possible. So these are butterfly hinges, just meaning that the members go taller so that they're going on the vertical members. You'd like to see these as close to the top and bottom horizontal members as possible, just because that's where a lot of that force is coming through, either from the brace, where it's going from the bottom of the hinge post to the top of the latch side of the gate, or just through those joints where one joint will always be pushing, the bottom joint will always be pushing, the top joint will always be pulling. These hinges are getting a little bit far away from that. Now, he explained that by saying he doesn't want to get into his screws. There's trade-offs and everything, I suppose, but the point being, you want the hinges to be as close to the top and bottom horizontal members as possible, because that's really where the force is coming from.
For installing the hinges, I recommend starting with the center lag bolt on either hinge, then check to make sure the gate is level before continuing with the remaining bolts. The post closer to the house was leaning in this instance, which meant I had to kick my hinge out on the bottom to compensate in order to make my gate level.
The problem is not replacing that post. So this is probably trying to get it done as easily as possible. But if that post has already started leaning, there's nothing saying it's done. For me, if it's already demonstrated that it will do it a little bit, it will likely do it a lot.
All right, now we're gonna put the fence pickets on our frame. I put a string up here to make sure that my fence pickets are gonna be in a straight line across. And I put all of the weight of the pickets on the end of my frame. That way, if there is any play or any movement, all of the weight's gonna be showing that movement now. So when I put on the fence pickets, it's gonna maintain and stay in that straight line that I want it to be in whenever all of it is assembled.
I like this idea. The thought here, though, one is that stack gets smaller as he's installing it. The weight will be less on the end, and so if that gate is dropping, it will let it spring back up. Also, when the gate's built, all that weight's not going to be at the edge. I mean, I know he's trying to offset it, which I love that there's thought there. I'm just not sure this is the way to accomplish it, because a good amount of this weight is actually going to be closer to the post, transferred to the post to that bottom hinge, rather than at the front of the gate transferred through the cross brace. I like that he's addressing it, but maybe he should be addressing it a different way.
You'll want to start your pickets from the center of the gate, so any skinny pickets you might have to rip due to spacing will be on the other end of the frame.
So I like putting ripped pickets more towards the hinge post rather than the latch post. My thinking being the customer, in this case the homeowner himself, is going to be using that gate right where the two gates meet. I mean, that's where the latching mechanism is. So your eyes are always going to see that first 3 or 4 boards on either side. I would want the ripped pickets to be closer to the post. They're less likely to become noticeable and become, aggravating to the eye. One person's opinion, though.
All right, so we're gonna be putting on our latch system before I finish putting on the pickets on this side. This is the kind of latch we're gonna use. There's a rod that will go here, that will go on the front side of this gate. And I put this first picket over a little bit so we'll have more privacy in between where the 2 gates meet up. And in order to make this lay flat, I'm gonna have to cut a little bit of this board out.
So that's a pretty tight tolerance there between the gates. It'll work well on day one. I understand it's braced really well and they're 6x6 posts, but these gates will move. Either the ground will continue to settle through winter and spring. I mean, they're treated pine structure with treated pine pickets. These gates are not stable. By giving yourself more tolerance between those gates, you're actually giving yourself more longevity for the gates. As they move, there's still some clearance in there. I would like to see an inch or inch and a half tolerance between the gate frames. Now, you could absolutely overlap the picket in the way he's done. Eventually, when they do rub, it's as easy as removing a picket, ripping it to the correct size, putting it back on. Again, like I said, now that's in front of the customer at all times when they're operating the gate, but it will allow those gates to be useful a little bit longer than a gate that's installed with such a tight tolerance that works well on the first day, but maybe not work well in subsequent years.
So that the bracket can lay flat against it and it won't scrape or rub the other fence. Now that we have that portion of the latch on, we can install the rest of our pickets.
Well, guys, the gate's up. He's ripping his last pickets here. Really, I wanted to talk about the structure of the gate, not necessarily as much of the finish of the gate. So, guys, how would you build a gate? Meaning that would you build it with diagonals and half lap? So, guys, let me know in the comments below, how would you build a wood frame gate even if you're a steel frame gate company? If you build wood frame gates, how would you build it? I like this way, a diagonal brace with a half lap joint, but maybe you would build it differently. I love hearing from you guys in the chat. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For now, Joe Everest, the fence expert, reminding you that good fences make good neighbors, and I'll see you next time.